So David, hey, what's probably the most common problem that you see with machine identity management, both today and in your experience at Gartner before?
You know, Kevin, it's a great question. I would say we're still in the relatively early phases of, I always map it back to people, process, and technology. So a lot of organizations have some of the technology out there. Maybe it's PKI deployment, certificate management, and that kind of stuff. So that covers some bits and pieces of the machine identity management problem, if you will. But the two areas that need a lot of work, and certainly there's much more work to be done on the tooling side, for sure, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But on the people and the process side, right? It's obviously encouraging to be here at Gartner to see many more machine identity tracks and that topic coming up more. But we're not into this phase where we're seeing, books and, common vernacular with a lot of CISOs and identity professionals. They're still very much focused on humans. So that's one thing I think we're in the midst of changing. And there's actually a way to bring some tangible view to this, and it's the Gartner Hype Cycle. So when we first published it, that was one of my babies. I think it was around the peak of inflated expectations, right? So
Coming up, yes.
It was coming up,
yes.
And now it's still in that phase. So there's the innovation trigger, which is the beginning, very new, and that's the up section, and then the peak, right? So now it's on the other side of the peak, and it's potentially headed to the trough of disillusionment, but we'll see how quickly that is. And I think they've pegged it at 2 to 3 years that it will be in the plateau of productivity. And for a quick crash course for our viewers today, innovation trigger, peak of inflated expectations, meaning that people think this is going to solve world hunger, and people literally did with technologies like blockchain. Then it usually enters the trough where they deployed it, they bought it, and all these promises where they thought blockchain was going to solve world hunger, it didn't, right? And so it goes into this trough. But then when it gets into the slope of enlightenment, it means now organizations are using these tools and technologies to solve real use cases. And then when you get to the plateau of productivity, the way how I like to describe it, Kevin, and when I was always describing hype cycles to customers and clients, plateau of productivity, you could put out an RFP and you'll get a good healthy set of comparable vendors that offer very consistent use cases. There's defined process, defined tooling, defined people, and all that. We're not there yet, but I would foresee that we're going to probably go through the trough quickly. So I think we're entering that next phase over the next year.
So one of the things you mentioned, the hype cycle that included machine identity management. And
yes.
That was one of the things that struck me, was that the importance of machine identity management is important as human identity management as a service, customer identity management, privileged access management. So really important business problems and business solutions, and machine identity management being just as important.
Absolutely. I think, when you see dots on those hype cycles, it is no easy feat for an analyst to just bring a new one, as I'm sure you know. But maybe our audience doesn't know that. So when someone like Gartner, Forrester, and others that are out there, when you see them actually start to rally behind something, a definition, ZTNA, SASE, machine identity management, right? Even PAM, or passwordless authentication. It means that there are patterns out there, common, and there are problems out there, and there's potentially some market. We saw this with cloud access security brokers as well, right? When people were trying to manage these. So when Eric Wallstrom and I sat down, it wasn't an easy feat for us to just kind of define this, because I'm sure you know, Kevin, when you define it, people go, oh, that's IoT security. And you're like, well, no, a container is not an Internet of Thing device. Right? Yes, it is connected on the internet, it lives on the internet, but it's not a physical, tangible thing. So it was quite an effort to get it through, but there's a peer review process, and we need to make sure, like, is this a real thing? So when that showed up there, it was definitely, I think I was very proud to actually live through that. But I think it's also a very important note to the market to say, this is something that's going to be here. It's something you're going to have to invest in, technology, people, and process, but just be mindful of where it is currently. But it is a little bit of a weird one, I will say, because when you double click on machine identity management, today, when you look at it, there's all sorts of different components. HSMs, certificate management, PKI, public and private. There's key management, there's secrets, there's PAM, as you mentioned, privileged account management, cloud infrastructure entitlements management. We could draw like a Venn diagram with all of these. Over time, I think you're going to see them start to blur and merge. And it already is kind of getting blurry. And it's interesting because some of these technologies are mature. So some of them, if we broke it apart and put them on the hype cycle, they'd be further on. So machine identity management's a little strange one. So I would just caution to say even where it is.
I think that breadth in machine identity management, again, is your vision put forward, actually, the importance of it. It does have a big problem set. It's a big problem to solve. And therefore it was very important, just as important as privileged access or identity as a service. So, So I think one of the things then, David, that we see is really common problem with machine identity management is just stopping certificate-related outages. It's most often where organizations would start. Why is that this is still, in 2022, and beyond, why is that still the most common machine identity management problem?
It's been a problem for a long time. And I would say, there's many elements to it, but probably one of the bigger ones is just scale. Scale in that, if you rewind the clock 15 years, even 20 years, when we maybe had only a few storefronts that use certificates, you could get by with a spreadsheet and managing them and have, Kevin sitting over there, and
maybe
he's just
you had your own spreadsheet. David.
Yes, I did. Yes, I think many of us are guilty of that. One of my former colleagues, he's now running identity at Salesforce as well. No, bring up Salesforce again. Ian Glazer. I remember in one of his sessions when he was a Gartner analyst, he showed a screenshot of Microsoft Excel and said, "No, this is not an IAM tool." And the same applies for machine identity management. So I think 15, 20 years ago, you could get by with a spreadsheet. But as the years moved forward and we have mobile apps, we got cloud environments, and we have elastic clouds with workloads and all this stuff, and these things need to be protected, the mighty spreadsheet is just not going to scale anymore. So we need proper tools to be able to discover, manage, and build policy to do the automation. And this is going to be existential for some businesses in many ways if they don't wrap their heads around that.
And so then there's something new too that you got to, which is the importance of developers, the importance of engineers. Because engineers, developers, they are creating machine identities, or actually more likely their pipelines or their cloud instances are creating machine identities themselves. This is something as well that's really different than human identity, where we have just one source of identities usually, but now you've got many different sources and it's automated and developed. It's developer-led. So where do we head to with machine identity management? How are we going to solve this?
So this is a team sport, right? Certainly you can have the CISO and their team help to maybe run a center of excellence for this, but it should have involvement from many other business units, because here's the other thing with developers, Kevin, is that there's not just a software engineering group. What we're seeing now more and more is developers are popping up in marketing, right, to write specific tools that the team might need. And they might be public facing, so they might need to have certificate-based authentication or public SSL or TLS certificates, right? But it runs the full spectrum. So they also have to be involved. They don't need to necessarily become crypto or machine identity experts, but they need to know at least the ramifications if they don't use good best practices and they don't refer back to maybe internal guidelines from a center of excellence. They could be exposing the organization to some serious issues.
Yep. I think this is what we've seen as the opportunity, is the need to stop outages, and now the need to modernize for speed and efficiency. So to eliminate the complexity, to make it simple, because developers, they just want to go fast.
Exactly.
As security professionals, we want to keep them safe. So this idea now of fast, secure, something I think is, that's what a Formula One engineer thinks about. I want to make sure the driver is at the edge of performance, but also they finish the race.
Yes.
That's the way we win.
Yes.
They finish safe. This is something that's really new for security professionals to take on. And I think, too, that's why now we're seeing this idea of a control plane for machine identity management start to evolve. It's take away the complexity, enable developers to go fast, consume a service, and at all times, whether you are in platform or whether you are in security teams, you've got the observability, you've got the confidence.
Yes.
How have you started to see that emerge, actually play out, this control plane for machine identity management?
So it's a great point. Control plane, fabric, right? The different terms that I've heard, or how some folks might think about it. I think at the end of the day, it needs to become more in the vernacular and more of a process within, if I'm thinking about developers, right? Because that's where I started my career as a software engineer. I was a big assembly language fan, right? So when object-oriented, it drove me crazy because I always like to know everything. But joking aside,
how's your accumulator doing these days?
I knew you were going to ask me that. The joking aside, Kevin, I mean, identity needs to become a part of their software development process, right? Do we have an identity framework, right? So they can write their code, they can do their testing, they think about, doing all of the regression testing of their applications, all of these things that are just common in software engineering. We need to do a better job in informing the software engineering community and DevOps community, or pick your name for that, so that it becomes a best practice. Because everything that they will write should have an identity, whether it's even things like code signing, or it's embedded certificates that are needed for machine-to-machine authentication.
And this is, I think, part of the future risk that we face going forward. It used to be the adversary was attacking our customers.
Yes.
Now we're seeing the adversary attack our developers.
Yes.
And they attack the machines that developers build, and how they do that, yes, that's machine identity.
Exactly. And if you're using static passwords or secrets that are just text-based, a savvy attacker can keylog that, they can grab it, and they can replay it, right? But going back to the control plane, the whole notion is that if we have developers thinking about identity, it's on us to be able to create that control plane and that fabric so that they can pull from it easily. We need, as you said, Kevin, they're all about speed. So we need to do the job so that they can pull from that control plane, get an identity for the entity, and it's simple and straightforward for them, so we're not holding them back. So it is a part of the software engineering process, but they're able to just do it quickly and move on.
Right. I think this is what we see as the outcomes then, that security leaders actually working with engineering leaders, they can actually measure success by the number of developers that are consuming the service. Now, really new for security teams, the speed of time to production, that's very, very different. Yes. And these are measurable outcomes that you can get out of machine identity management, not just stopping the outages, still very important, no outages, but that speed that now we can deliver to the business. Because, we just make it easy, consistent, simple, take away the complexity. That's what developers will love.
Exactly. So making it a part of that whole process, and of course the outages. The outages are always going to be a concern and a problem because that has direct and measurable pain and cost for the business. So that, I think, is never going to go away. That's always going to be something that, and it shouldn't keep businesses up at night and those professionals up at night. But it now is a team sport, going back to what I was saying earlier, where, sure, you might have a few experts in these areas, but they really need to make sure that they are, I would say ABC, always be selling, right? They're always selling the notion of a center of excellence so that they know, the organization knows as a whole, this stuff is critical. And it's there so we protect our brand, we're not in the news, and our stock's not tanking because we got breached.
And I think that's something that you help security professionals understand. Tell a story. So machine identity management, that's a story I can share with my CEO.
Yes.
A control plane for machine identity management, my CIO understands that. I can explain it to developers. I can explain both why they need machine identities and how a control plane is going to help them go faster.
Yes.
Still have questions? Turn to Venafi, the machine identity experts. Check out our channel or visit venafi.com to learn about all things encryption, certificate management, and more.